Two friends stepped off K2's shoulder, thinking the hard part was over. Thin air, cold wind, headlamps carving a narrow tunnel through the dark. Minutes later, radio silent. Something went fatally wrong. Was it a tired misstep, a brittle anchor, a sudden gust, or a call made in the worst second? Searchers traced a fall line that hinted at the truth, but the mountain kept the final move to itself. This is the descent that shattered a partnership and raised brutal questions about how K2 is climbed today. They weren't thrill chasers. One was Matthew Eakin, an Australian climber who built community as much as he chased summits. The other was Dr. Richard Cartier, a veteran alpinist from Quebec and a palliative care physician who treated endings with dignity for a living. Different worlds, same pull toward thin air, and the kind of trust that only forms when you've shared a rope in the dark. They planned a clean acclimatization cycle, then a single patient summit push. No stunts, just the line. They'd come up through the same crowded summer season that makes K2 feel louder than it should. Still, their partnership looked deliberate. Steady pace, conservative calls, and a shared belief that the best descent starts with humility at the top. Friends described Cartier as methodical, Eakin as a connector, the guy who encouraged others to keep showing up. It's why what happened next stung so hard. They were climbing to live well, not to go viral. But the mountain had its own schedule. The signs were subtle at first, long hours stacked back to back, a push high on the route, and the creeping fatigue that blurs the edges of judgment. A teammate's final update mentioned tagging the high camps, temperatures dropping, and a plan to head down worn out after 2 big days. That's the trapdoor on K2. The ascent drains you, the descent cashes the check. They started down toward Camp 2, and then the easy-sounding drop to Camp 1, a section many describe as straightforward, right up until it isn't. The angle is just steep enough to punish a slip, and the snow hides patches of iron-hard ice. Fixed lines can be old, anchors can be tired, and when you've been moving for hours at altitude, your hands don't always do what your brain tells them. By the time anyone below noticed the silence on the radio, the night had swallowed the trace. Searchers later reported one body near the old Japanese Camp 1 and the other far lower, close to advanced base camp. That distance tells its own story. A stumble becomes speed, speed becomes flight, and even the strongest rope team can be torn apart by the physics of a fall line. Exact cause? No single answer, just the brutal math of visto angle, ice, and exhaustion. The mountain erased the evidence in minutes, but that wasn't the whole story. Here's the lie every climber tells themselves: once you're below Camp 2, you can breathe again. The slope looks manageable, the path is familiar, but the surface is treacherous. Wind-scoured crust, hiding plates of glassy ice, old rope threaded through anchors that have seen too many seasons. One lazy step and you're crampon skates. One rushed clip and the carabiner bites air. Fatigue makes the terrain meaner. At altitude, your brain runs on half power, hands numb, judgment narrows. You move by habit, not thought. The slope tilts just enough that a stumble becomes acceleration, and acceleration becomes a fight you're not built to win. The snow won't cushion, the ice won't forgive. If one person slips while the other is re-rigging or out of sync, the rope turns from safety line to sling. Night compounds everything. Headlamps carve tunnels instead of landscapes. Depth is guesswork. A small cornice lip looks like a shadow. A shadow looks like a foothold. Wind gusts make you lean in at the wrong time. A loose screw rattles your focus. Even a simple transition, from one fixed line to the next, becomes a tiny puzzle with cruel consequences if you get it wrong. There's also the echo effect on that face. A dropped pack, a snapped strap, a chunk of ice skipping by. Each sound is a spark in the mind. You hurry by just a beat. That's all it takes. A rushed move at a station, a glove half off to fiddle with a knot. A clip that feels right until the weight goes on it. Nothing dramatic. Just the kind of micro-error climbers survive 100 times, except this time, on this slope, momentum takes over. And if the rope team is tight when the first fall happens, both are yanked into the same physics lesson. Bodies accelerate in tandem. The line whips around rock features you didn't see. Anchors that would hold one load don't always hold two. In seconds, the descent becomes a slide, then a tumble, then silence. That's why this stretch is infamous. It doesn't need a storm to turn deadly. It just needs one imperfect second. By the time anyone below wonders why the lights aren't moving, the mountain has already smoothed the snow and swallowed the noise. Tracks fade, wind writes a new story over the old one. And when the night finally gives way, what searchers find tells only part of what happened. Because what came next wasn't a rescue, it was a recovery. And where they were found raised even harder questions. Morning light traced the slope like a scanner. Teams looked where the route funnels, where gravity would carry anything that slips free. One body lay near the old Japanese Camp 1 site. Boots still pointed downhill, as if the descent hadn't finished. The other was far lower, close to advanced base camp. The last ledge before the glacier opens wide. That distance wasn't random. It was a map drawn by momentum. There were no dramatic clues, no tidy answer taped to a pack, just a scatter of gear, a rope that told less than people wanted, and the stark line between where the living move and where the mountain stores its secrets. Identification came with the weight no teammate ever wants to carry. Messages went out to families who already knew, somehow, because silence after a storm always sounds the same. Rescuers and friends did what they could: recover, witness, remember. The story that took hours to unfold was over in seconds. And yet, the place they were found said more than any statement could. This wasn't exposure over days or getting trapped high. This was a fall that began in the space between two normal moves. One heartbeat too quick, one foothold too slick. But to understand why that tiny mistake becomes irreversible on K2, you have to zoom out. K2 isn't the tallest, but it's engineered by nature to punish hesitation. Angles stay steep for cruelly long stretches. The terrain stacks traps, bulletproof ice under sugar snow, rock ribs that snag a rope at the worst moment, and long traverses where you're exposed for minutes that feel like hours. The descent asks for balance when your legs are empty and precision when your brain is starved of oxygen. History on this mountain reads like a pattern, not a list. Fixed lines matter until they don't. One frayed section or a tired anchor can erase a dozen careful clips. Weather matters until it shifts in 5 minutes and turns a routine down climb into a blind test. Crowds matter because every person ahead of you means more waiting, colder hands, dimmer focus. Night matters most of all. It turns depth into rumor and makes a safe step look identical to the fatal one. Even elite climbers lose to that math. Strength doesn't cancel ice. Experience doesn't cancel gravity. When you're moving in the death zone, everything costs more. A glove off is a minute lost. A knot redone is heat you won't get back. A misread surface is velocity. And velocity is the one thing you can't negotiate with. You can fight a slip. You can maybe ride out a slide. But once speed takes over, it writes the ending for you. That's why the descent from Camp 2 toward Camp 1 is so deceptive. It's famous for being straightforward, which is another way of saying people relax. They loosen the coil. They think about the stove back at camp, the hot drink, the messages to send. Then the mountain collects its fee, not with drama, with physics. And in recent seasons, another factor crept in, pressure from a new kind of summit day that changed how decisions get made. K2 used to be a whisper. Now it's a timeline. More teams, more fixed ropes, more oxygen bottles stacked like cordwood at the high camps, and always a camera pointed up. That changes what a climber thinks about in the margin. The 5 seconds at an anchor, the choice to wait or pass, the tiny gamble taken because the clock, the weather, and the internet all demand a win. Traffic creates colder hands and slower minds. Bottlenecks create impatience. Impatience creates mistakes. In recent seasons, footage from the route sparked outrage and think pieces. Who helps? Who keeps moving? Who gets to decide when the mountain takes priority over the human right in front of you? None of that noise explains what happened to 2 friends in the dark between camps, but it frames the pressure every rope team feels now. The mountain hasn't changed. We have. There isn't a single neat cause. No one detail ties a bow on it. It could have been a missed clip while swapping lines. It could have been a foot skidding on glassy ice disguised as snow. It could have been an anchor that had one more load left, and they were the next in line. Fatigue was real. Night was real. Steep angle, real. Two friends tied together by trust, moving through a corridor where speed compounds faster than judgment can keep up. And when you strip away the noise, you're left with a simpler, harder question. What actually happened that night? What we can say is this: the fall began somewhere ordinary. Not on a headline feature. Not in a storm that made the news. In the space between a careful action and an almost perfect one. Once momentum took over, it did what momentum always does on K2, turned a small slip into a long, unforgiving slide. Searchers found what the slope predicted they would. The rest is silence, and speculation doesn't help. Respect does. So the facts stop, but the meaning doesn't. That lives with the people who love them, and the climbers who still clip into the same line. News traveled fast, stories traveled farther. Friends remembered steady hands, dumb jokes, real kindness. Base camp went quiet, small rituals marking big lives. The lesson wasn't fearlessness, it was care. Double-check the simple, save energy for the descent, treat the pull on the rope like a person, not gear. That's what arm in arm means up there, and that's where the meaning lands for the rest of us.